Well, hello everyone. WFA's Jay Wallis here with William Joy. We're going to talk about an issue that William Joy has been working on, has been researching on, and we're going to start it off with just simply, what is the superconducting super collider, William?
Well, besides being a tongue twister, it's first off, there's the non-science answer, and then there's the science answer. So the non-science answer is it was going to be this massive tunnel in Ellis County, Waxahachie, right? So about 30 miles south of Dallas. The science answer is that a super collider is the way that we study basically what the world's made of and how it works. I mean, it literally takes the smallest particles in the universe, right? So like think of an atom, right? We all know atoms are the building blocks, right? And so inside an atom, there's protons and electrons. So it takes these protons by literally just squirting hydrogen gas into a tube, and then using magnets and electricity gets these things going around this tube. And in the case of the superconducting super collider in Waxahachie, a 54-mile tube, they're going around this thing at basically the speed of light, and then they smash into each other. And when that happens, they literally have these collisions that haven't happened since the Big Bang. And scientists are able to study that, take a lot of measurements, and learn a lot about science. So back in the 80s, into the 90s, Waxahachie, Ellis County was like the center of the science, at least the physics universe. I mean, literally in the world, because they were going to build, they started to build this massive super collider in Waxahachie. And again, it was going to be the world's largest tunneling project, 54 miles, twice as big as the tunnel. For perspective, it's 10 miles bigger than Loop 12, 20 miles bigger than the 820 loop. And this is underground, right? So they're building this thing, and it never gets finished. And it's interesting, the crazy thing about this story and the reason we wanted to share it is that if you were in North Texas at the time, you either know about this project well, or you have at least heard the name. But if you were younger, didn't know what was going on, or you're one of the tens of thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands, who have moved here since then, you've probably never heard this name, because it's a project that the very interesting part of it is people have worked hard to forget about it. I mean, people who were here at the time kind of just let it go. The people who worked on it have, I mean, it's literally a suppressed memory for a lot of these people.
So initially, how long was it supposed to take to build, and how far did they get into the project?
So construction, so you got to imagine a project of this scale. I mean, think about just like when they build an overpass, it feels like it takes 10 years, right? They're building like the world's largest super collider in this giant 54-mile tunnel, right? So the initial idea came about in the 1970s. Plans get kind of drawn up by the Department of Energy in 1983. They put together a proposal. Reagan approves it in 1987. Waxahachie, Ellis County is selected in 88. Construction, or like the plans for construction, start in 89. The actual building starts in 91. Well, by 91, there were already some kind of criticisms to it. 93 is when the tunnel started, and they actually built 16 miles of this tunnel. I mean, to this day, massive 16-mile tunnel exists under the ground in Ellis County. A lot of people aren't aware of that. They built that 16 miles in just 10 months, from January of 93 to October of 93, which is when it got canceled. So it was supposed to finish in 1998, which, again, for perspective, currently the world's largest super collider is in Geneva, Switzerland, CERN. You may have heard of the Large Hadron Collider. This thing would have been 3 times that size, 3 times more energetic, and it would have been done a decade earlier, which is kind of remarkable.
You mentioned there were some criticisms. What were some of the most common criticisms of this project?
So it's interesting. There's literally a book, Who Killed the Superconducting Super Collider. I'm sure I got the title wrong. It might be like, why it failed. There's a 485-page retrospective study on what went wrong with the super collider. I mean, think about it. There's a 500-page book about a project that a lot of people don't even know about. And there's a lot of different reasons. The one that everybody points to the most is politics, right? You got to remember 1975, 1983, you got the Cold Wars going on. This was a time where be first, no matter what was happening. Remember the moon landing, 69, like I said, 70s, we were like, they compared it. That was outer space. This is inner space, right? We're gonna be the first, the leading edge of everything, right? And so we were all in. 1991 again, construction happens, a lot happening, right? You got the economy's going up and down, right? 93. So Clinton's elected. And that's what a lot of people point to. You have a Texas president, Bush, who would have saved this thing. And then you have an Arkansas president in Clinton, and you got a lot of budget tightening. A lot of freshman congressmen came on board. I mean, if you really want to get in the weeds, the Speaker of the House was from Texas, from Fort Worth, actually at the time. And then, he resigns, leaves office. So then all of a sudden you have this big change in politics at the time is what a lot of people point to. But there's really, the best way to describe it is this kind of snowball effect of bad luck and poor decisions. I mean, like I said, there's a 485-page book, so I can get into some of them. I don't want to bore everybody, but let me put it like some of the small stuff that became big is like the tube that these protons are going around in that's 54 miles long. A 1 centimeter change to the aperture, to the inside of this thing from, I think it's 4 centimeters to 5 centimeters, it'll increase the cost by $1 billion, right? And this was like, that's a small change that was like, made a huge difference, right? Then the Japanese were going to invest $1 billion, maybe $2 billion in the project. That was going to be the thing that carried the day. And everybody on the project agrees that would have saved the day. Well, President Bush was going to go December 7th, 1991, the 50th anniversary of Pearl Harbor. It was going to kind of be this, to celebrate it. It was preordained that they were going to, announce their donation to, science and cooperation with the federal government. Well, that trip gets postponed to 1992. In the meantime, there's controversy about the auto industry in Japan, taking jobs from America. So instead, this trip becomes an auto industry bashing trip for Bush. Then he literally throws up at a state dinner, like passes out. Google the video. He passes out and throws up, which is embarrassing. But I will tell you that the people I talked to, including the laboratory director, is adamant that, well, that was embarrassing. It was the bashing Japan that changed things. So obviously the trip gets canceled after he gets sick. By then, the Japanese see that he's going to lose the election or could lose the election. So they kind of get cold. A million different things that you can point to on this project that resulted in the end here.
So I can imagine with a project like this, there's the potential to create a lot of jobs. What were some of the types of jobs that this would have created?
So at the time it was canceled, there were already 2,000 people working directly on the project, okay? You had contractors from all over the world, actually, who were working 24/7 on this thing. But on top of that, I mean, there were plans, the spin-off estimates were something like 8,000 jobs, and that was just initially. But you got to remember, there were thoughts that this could have improved the internet, this could have improved computers, this could have improved medicine, that we wouldn't have just had, just today, right? 120,000 people a year visit CERN in Switzerland. 70% of the world's particle physicists study there because it's the best place to do this kind of high energy physics research. They would have all been in Waxahachie, or at least the majority. Especially American physicists. Now we're sending scientists overseas. So you would have had all of that, plus all of the research park spinoffs that are using this information. The construction, like I said, was creating thousands of jobs. It would have everybody from the science side. I talked to the physicists from the engineering side. I talked to people who were on city council and the county judge at the time. And they truly believed that this would have sent that county, sent the entirety of North Texas really on an entirely different trajectory. We've got Texas Instruments here. We've got a lot of different large, companies that are based right here. But just think of all the computer research and engineering that have come out of this, and it's pretty incredible to think about.
We're talking about things that happened 30, 40, 50 years ago. Why has someone or some organization, or what has prevented this project from getting going again for decades now?
Yeah, it was interesting. It's one of those things that I feel like would only come about at a time when, I wasn't alive during the 70s, spoiler, but it could only come about when, at a time when, like I said, being first no matter the cost was really the goal. Where ambition was, Reagan's comment when the plans were presented to him was throw deep, right? This came about at a time where we just wanted to shoot for the moon. And that's what's so sad about this project. It's interesting. You talk to anybody who was involved in this, whether on the city side, right, and they're concerned about Waxahachie, Ellis County. You talk to anybody on the physics side, to the engineer on the project, and you ask them to say, what does it mean for you, this project at the SSC? I mean, what words come to mind? And at first they kind of light up because it was just this exciting time, right? And you got to imagine, people would walk down the street and they didn't know the physics part of this, but they'd walk down the street and bump into people in Waxahachie and they're just, you guys are doing exciting stuff, right? That was just the feeling. And then they kind of look off, to the side or off to the, corner, or look down and just kind of shake their heads and say, what a shame. What a shame, what could have been. I mean, that was the phrase everybody I talked to said, some variation of what could have been. And to me, that's the most fascinating part about this, is everybody on the project has maybe 1-2 keepsake from the project. The head engineer has a big map, a suitcase of memorabilia, his work ID, and he never looks at it. He stores it like it's an old, I think I said in the story, like it's old baseball cards, right? But he said to me, I kept all this stuff and I don't know why, but I did. And he knows why, right? It's one of those things, right? Like a shoebox of stuff that you're just not sure why you have, but you don't want to let it go. I mean, that's what it is for everybody. I talked to a former city councilman. He keeps an old Dallas Life magazine in a paper envelope, right? Keeps it safe. But just to have. But it represents both the greatest success and greatest failure of each of these persons' lives. And to me, that's what's so fascinating about it. The physicist on the project, Roy Schwitters, he was the laboratory director. And he said, I don't really keep much stuff, but he does keep this one photo. And it's in our story, and it's a remarkable photo. It's what caught me right off the bat. And it's this shot of a 200-foot shaft leading down to the tunnel. And it just speaks to the size and scope and ambition of this project. And that's what I think, if he was to see a psychologist about it, or maybe I'm projecting, that it just speaks to the ambition, right? And what could have been. And yeah, it's just sad that it got thrown away. I mean, literally as the scientists were leaving town, they were throwing these massive 3-foot photo boards of the project into dumpsters. And one guy found them, he brought them to the Ellis County Museum. And I'll tell you, the Ellis County Museum has an upstairs storage area, right? That you can't even get to unless you have a key or something. And that's where they were keeping all this stuff. That's what's fascinating to me. So they have all this stuff, and it's become this kind of purposely forgotten history. But I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from it, right? About commitment, about ambition, about what if, right? And preventing the what ifs of the future. I mean, when this project got killed, the space program almost got killed at the same time. And there's a lot of people who will tell you, I mean, that's why the SSC got killed, as it was an easy vote for people. Oh, well, space, we already know about space, and they've gone to the moon, and that's real cool. We don't know what this thing does, so we'll kill that and we'll save this. But they both almost got killed, honestly. And so, yeah, it's a memory of literally what could have been. I mean, it's crazy to think about what would exist here now if this project had still existed.
You called it purposely forgotten history, but we can't forget there was still plenty of construction that physically and actually did happen. So, I mean, we got to talk about the elephant in the room. What happened to what was already built and what is there right now?
So for a while, they really struggled to sell the buildings, because what's interesting is because everything had to be so precise, the engineer was telling me there's 6 feet of pure concrete right below the surface of these buildings, because they couldn't move at all, right? Like nobody needs that. So what ended up happening is a company called MagnaBlend bought it, and that's a chemical manufacturer. And then MagnaBlend had a big fire, so that was the big issue out there. Now Univar, another chemical manufacturer, owns it. And so if you look at the buildings, I mean, they look the exact same as they did. The tunnels have now all been capped, right? So you can't go in there. The shafts are kind of flooded with rainwater at this point, so you can't, if you were to, it's not like you can go down and explore, although I really wish you could, or like scuba dive or something, that'd be really cool. It's definitely not safe. But yeah, the shafts are now capped, and the tunnels, like I said, flooded. But the land itself is owned by that chemical manufacturer. Like I said, they built 16 miles of this thing in just 10 months. They had 5 machines that were tunneling constantly 24/7. And I'll tell you the main reason, at least one of the reasons, but certainly the main reason I think a lot of people point to that Waxahachie got picked, that Ellis County got picked, is it sits on Austin chalk, right? This bed of limestone that is perfect for tunneling. It gives you this perfect like hole that's bored through the bored underground without risking stability or anything along those lines. What's interesting too is if you look at the site from above or even out on the ground, there's these slight like hills or mounds that look out of place. That's because I guess during this federal project, the engineer was explaining they couldn't sell the dirt to anybody for anything. So they were digging, like I said, 16 miles of tunnel, but they just had to like keep the dirt. So they just stored it off to the side. So there's these hills out there of dirt that just look out of place slightly.
Ask you more of a journalism question now, journalist to journalist.
Okay.
What was something that, you obviously did some research on this. You knew about it before. I'm assuming you had a lot of these interviews that you had with people. What's something that you took away from talking to people one-on-one, not just reading articles, not just doing your research? When you talk to the people connected to this, what was something that surprised you, something that caught you off guard? What was kind of the most interesting thing you learned from those in-person conversations?
I think it's just how much I think going into it, I thought it would be a cool thing for people. I think they would have been like, I know it got canceled and everything, but I didn't realize how much it still haunted the people who worked on it. And I say haunt, I mean, the Joe Bohr, who told me he gets kidded or was kidded for 30 years about the last name Bohr, and he's a tunneling expert. But he told me it took him 4 years before he would go out to the site to see it again. He's like, I had to go see a doctor. I fell into a real depression. He's like, to this day, I don't like to think about it. I try to blank it out of my mind. And I don't think I understood how much it haunted people. I mean, many people on the project went on to have successful careers. Roy Schwitter's taught physics at the UT Austin, now is retired off the coast of Seattle. Edwin Farah, former city councilman, like I said, still went on to have a successful real estate career, but, was just, frustrated, right? They devoted their lives to this thing, and there was just this incredible excitement. And I don't think anybody on that project with a real connection to it has gotten over it even at all. And we're 30 years later, if not more. So that's to me was really remarkable.
You said that this was kind of the motivation and the being the first to build this was a big part of the motivation to work on this. Has another country passed us up? Has there been one similar to the superconducting super collider that we were going to build? Has another one been built around the world?
So, I mean, the closest example is, when this was built, Fermilab in Chicago, which still exists today, had their own collider. And I'll tell you, that's one of the issues with the project is when they initially came up with the design group just kind of assumed, according to Roy Schwitter's, that this thing was going to Fermilab in Chicago. So they didn't include a lot of the stuff that starting from scratch would require, which meant that right off the bat, the cost estimate had to go up a lot, which, increasing costs in trying to complete a project is generally not a good formula. And they also didn't commit funds right off the bat. It's not the point. So the super collider, the Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland, CERN, is the closest comparable example. But again, it's a third of both the energy and the size of what the super collider in Texas would have had. To this day, this would be the leading high energy physics site in the world. Nothing has come close, and nobody's even attempted anything close to this anywhere in the world. And maybe it's because everybody just kind of commits some money into CERN, and they've won a handful of Nobel Prizes. In fact, they won one right off the bat for the discovery of the Higgs boson particle, which is, I'm not going to even try to explain because I'll get it way wrong, but basically it's nicknamed the God particle. So there's a lot about physics that even to this day we say, we don't know why that happens, but it just happens the way it happens. The whole purpose of high energy physics is to try to explain or really observe these things till we can know the real reason why X, Y, and Z happens. Now it's in Switzerland. Like I said, our top physicists in the US go to Switzerland to study, and that's one of the things that we kind of just kick ourselves about, is this was one part of science that we're no longer the leading edge on.
Believe, or maybe the better way to ask it, the people that you talk to, do they believe Texas will ever get a superconducting super collider similar to this, or is this really just a part of history now?
Nobody even hinted at the idea that we would try to attempt something like this again. If we did, I would imagine it would be, and again, this is me going off on a limb, not knowing anything, but Fermilab is the main site where we're doing a lot of that stuff right now up in Chicago. They've made some discoveries of their own. And I imagine any sort of advancements would go there. Do you actually need 54 miles now? Again, I don't know how much the machines have advanced at this point. This is William, not high energy physics. Although I will say my conversation with Roy Schwitters was well over an hour. So I feel like I did kind of get like the dumbed down lecture both of this project and physics. But yeah, I just don't see it happening again. And I think, Roy didn't exactly say, but kind of implied that he doesn't see us ever attempting anything like this again. It is funny to think, though. I mean, the cost was initially around $3 billion. It ended up at just over 10, maybe 11, depending on who you ask. And it's funny to think, $10 billion today, the way we spend money, especially on defense, is a drop in the bucket. Granted, with today's dollars versus the 90s, it'd be different, but still, it's still nothing relative to the amount that we spend on science and defense even today, and it would be remarkable if we could build something like this.
Why do you think it's important? And maybe this is more about just knowing history and knowing about the city you live in, but why do you think it's important for viewers, people watching this video right now, to read the article, to learn about what could have been, to learn about this history? Why is it important for people to know about this story?
So like I said from the beginning, I think there are two different types of people who are going to read this story. One are the people who are like, oh my goodness, I've never even heard of that. Like, there's a giant tunnel under the ground. And other people may have heard about it in passing or know something about it, but don't know the details. And so I'm a history nerd to a certain degree, which is why I loved this story. So I think there's the history side of this. But again, as I talked about, there's the lessons to be learned side, right? Which is the importance of ambition, the importance of not to put on the Captain America suit, but to try to be on the leading edge of science and research and discovery. And that was something that really was at the forefront of all of our thinking, right? Back in the day was, one of the offsets of this was going to be a huge boost to the education system in Texas. Think about the number of physicists who would have worked on this project, not to mention the research spin-offs of this thing right here in Texas, in North Texas. So, the importance of ambition, the importance of research and discovery, staying on the leading edge. And there's a lot of people, part of the politics of this that still frustrates people in Ellis County is to build this project, they had to use eminent domain. There's a lot of people that lost farms or portions of farms that had been in their families for generations. And then, it was frowned upon, but hey, we're doing it for the betterment of America. And it was hurrah, again, you gotta remember the times, and then they just didn't finish it. And so that left a really sour taste in a lot of people's mouths. Now they're trying to build a train through there. So now they want to, build the parallels, but I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from. I really do.
Well, William, I'll ask you the standard last question that journalists always ask the person they're interviewing. What else? Is there anything else on this you want to make sure that you can say? What do we not cover that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I just think that the biggest thing is I hope people take something from this, right? I think there's a different lesson for everybody. And the history of it alone, to me, is fascinating. The scale of it, I think when you see the photos and the videos, I think a lot of people will be amazed that it even existed to begin with. But yeah, I think what's interesting is it's a part of history that has been almost totally forgotten and on purpose by the people who were closest to it. So yeah, that's what I think is the most interesting part of this whole thing.
Well, William, thank you for the time and thank you for the story. Hopefully people enjoy this video and people enjoy your story. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, man. See ya.